Hello, I'm Heather Mendick, and this is the third of 3 videos where we talk through the interim findings that we've got, the emerging ideas coming out of our research about celebrity and young people's aspirations. And my focus is on the individual interviews that we've done with 50 young people across England in rural and urban locations. So I'm going to start with what we talked to them about. So at the beginning of the interview we asked for some biographical information, kind of like how they feel about the local area they live in, where else they've lived, and also about their family, and they told us about their parents and anyone else they lived with and what they were doing and so on. And then we moved on and we asked them to imagine that 12 case study celebrities who we looked at in detail, and I'll tell you more about those in a minute, were their age and went to their school. And we said, well, who do you think you'd want to be friends with, who do you want to avoid, and how do you think they get on, socially, academically? And then, finally we said, okay, any celebrity, alive or dead, who would you want to go to school with in your dreams? After this section of the interview, we had a section on aspirations and choices, and we started with what they thought happiness and success might be for celebrities, and then what they thought might bring them happiness and success in the future. So then we asked about their aspirations, focusing on education and employment, but not exclusively about that. Talked to them about how they're making the choices they were, who they talked to about them, and if they had any particular memories that they associated with things they wanted to do in the future, the areas they wanted to study, the places they wanted to work. The final section of the interview covered what it's like to be a young person and issues around inequality. So we asked them if they thought there were things that stopped young people achieving their dreams, and if there were things they thought would stop them achieving their dreams in the future. And then we asked what they thought it was like to be a young person today, and for any differences they felt they were by gender, or by social class, or by generation. So when your parents were young, do you think it was the same for them, or different for them, and why? So now what you'll see on the screen is pictures that we showed them when we asked them about celebrities, and these are 12 case study celebrities. So they're Kim Kardashian, Katie Price, Justin Bieber, Nicki Minaj, Beyonce, Mario Balotelli, Tom Daley, Will Smith, Kate Middleton, Emma Watson, Prince Harry and Bill Gates. And not everybody recognised all different celebrities, but we did find that there were some kind of patterns emerging. In terms of who they want to be friends with, top of the list were Prince Harry and Will Smith, but out of the women, Emma Watson was very popular and Kate Middleton was as well. If I turn just to give you an overview of what they thought in terms of how they would do at school, the least academically successful they felt would be Justin Bieber, Kate Middleton, no sorry that's wrong, the wrong Kate there, Katie Price, Kim Kardashian, Nicki Minaj, so these 4 who were at the side of the screen together. And that's because young people thought that they would be in the popular group, or the kids who wanted to be popular anyway, and so they were more obsessed with gossip, with the social side of the school and with fashion, and so that would detract from their studies and they wouldn't really focus on those. Sometimes Beyonce got put into that group of the kids who were trying to be popular, and sometimes she was seen as more hardworking. Similarly, like Mario Balotelli, there were kind of mixed views on him. So sometimes he was seen as a joker, but sometimes he was seen as quite successful because of his association with sport and how some schools really valued sport and put forward those young people who were successful at that. In terms of the best academically, here we have the 2 royals, Kate Middleton and Prince Harry, who people felt because they were hard-working, they saw them as, and formal people, and also because of the pressure in the royal family to do well. Academically they thought they would do well. Also Emma Watson was seen as successful. Some people knew she'd been quite successful at school in real life. Other people I think were conflating her with Hermione Granger, the character she played for so long in Harry Potter. And so again, she was obviously very successful in school. Bill Gates was seen as successful, but often in quite limited ways, specialising in IT and maybe maths and science. And then there's Will Smith, who was seen as a bit of a class joker, but not like Mario Balotelli, who would take things too far, more kind of constrained. And finally, Tom Daley. And people did see him as very hard-working because of the training he has to do for the Olympic diving, but they also thought that that might put pressure on him and take him away from his studies. So what I want to do now, having given you a sense of overview, is to talk to you about the focus on the individual that we were able to have within the interviews, because we were talking one-to-one to people, in contrast to the group interviews, we're able to focus on young people's aspirations, on how they were kind of forming those and the kind of influences on those. And I'm going to just tell you about one person who's called Will Smith. He's not the Will Smith, but he chose that as his pseudonym because he really thought Will Smith was a great celebrity and he thought he was very cool and he liked the way he played basketball. I'll come back to that. So this Will Smith, he was rather different than the famous one. He was in a rural school in the southwest of England and he really liked the area. Like a lot of the young people out of school, he enjoyed the way it's friendly, the way it was a safe environment, and the way there were a lot of opportunities. And he particularly valued the opportunities to be outdoors. And here's a quote from him which should be appearing on screen now. He said, "I hate studying for things. I just want to be out there, especially if it's sunny. That just gets me really annoyed. You're just wasting your life away, just sat inside watching TV and stuff, where you could be outside just doing something and getting a lot more enjoyment out of it." And this idea of being outside and being active runs through his interview, and I'll keep coming back to that. He was working class. His mother was a childminder and his father worked at the local hospital and he fixed stuff there, like lifts was an example he gave. His oldest brother was an outdoor instructor and that was something that Will wanted to do. But there was a bit of social mobility within the family because his middle brother, who was a bit older than him, was currently at a local university studying, as Will put it, some sort of engineering. But although we'd classify him as working class, he saw himself as middle class. And he said, quite typically of the participants in the research, "I'm not posh, I'm not poor, I'm just me. I'm just in the middle." Because we do get money in, but we all earn our money. It's not like we've got anything given to us. So we can see when he's talking about social class here, he's talking about being in the middle, partly to say, I'm normal, but also partly to say, I'm just me, to take himself outside of the class system. We did find quite a lot of young people disassociating from the idea of being in a particular social class. He also talks about earning money, him and his family, so not being given anything, and that's a very important aspect to his sense of self. And to talk about that in more detail, I want to talk about the distinction he made between earning and learning. In terms of earning, he had a very extensive part-time job. He was working 20 plus hours a week at a local sports centre and he was doing lifeguarding mostly, but he'd recently started teaching swimming. And he talked with great responsibility about his work there. So he talked about how there you learn a lot about later life. You learn that life's not fair and like you're going to miss things that you want to do because you have to do what you have to do and that's what you signed up for. You can't let people down. He also talked about how he got friends of different ages and so he was kind of growing up through that work. However, when he talked about school, he talked about how he came across as quite lazy to some people, especially my teachers, because I just don't like studying, I just like being outside. He also talked about teachers who complain about him leaving school early, sometimes when he has to cover a shift when someone's out sick or something. And he says there's a contradiction here, even though they spend their life trying to get you a job, they then complain about it when you're taking your work seriously. But also at school, there was a real sense of irresponsibility about him. So he says he acts without thinking, and when you think about it, it's like, I shouldn't have done that. An example he gave was how he was excluded for 3 days a few weeks ago for pulling a moonie. And I was really struck between the contrast between this kind of responsible earner and this kind of more irresponsible learner. So what I want to do now is to explore in more detail what he wants to do in the future and the kind of work life that he wants to establish for himself. And that's very much tied to outdoor activities, as I said. And I want to share with you some of the memories that he associates with that. The earliest memory he has is about when he was 3 or 4 years old, and it was when he climbed his first mountain. And he says, I remember standing on top and standing on the tree point and just being like, I'm here, I've done it. Like, because I've been up. And like my mum had carried me up and Dad carried me up in a rucksack thing before. And since I was crawling around the floor. But there was just, like, I just remember the achievement of doing it and being up there. And like, I found a picture the other day of me and I looked quite good. The grin, a massive toothy grin on my face. I was soaking wet as well, it just tipped it down. So that's the first memory. The second memory I've got for you is much more recent, it's from a year ago. And it's when he did the 10 Tours, which is a walking event across a weekend in Dartmoor. And you do it in teams. and he had done it, and he told me that he'd been throwing up. And I said to him, and he also told me he enjoyed it. So I said, well, how come you enjoyed it? I don't understand why that being sick would be so pleasurable. And he explained that it was the feeling of crossing the line after walking 45 miles, being sick every 3 steps, and not drinking and not being able to drink or eat at all, just literally being carried by your team. I think what these two memories, when you take them together, show is how much is invested emotionally by young people in the choices they make, and by all of us in the choices that we make, and the hopes and dreams that we have for our futures. So you can see the relationships with his parents and them introducing him to mountain climbing at such a young age. You can see also the kind of idea of him as a good friend and a good team player. So he didn't want to let his team down by dropping out of the 10 tours, even though he was sick. But also he was carried over the line by them. And you can also, I think, see this idea of him as someone who triumphs over adversity. So really getting up that first mountain, even though he was only like 3 or 4 years old, and it was raining and it was chucking it down, and getting through the 10 tours even though he was throwing up and couldn't even drink. And I think one of the things that we're still at the very early stages of working with this interview data, one of the things that is really a struggle for us is to try to disentangle these kind of influences from the role of celebrity. So I'm going to end by just telling you a little bit about what he said about that. So when I asked Will, who would you really want to go to school with out of anyone, he mentioned 2 NBA basketball players, LeBron James and Dwayne Wade. And he said, well, they would be fun, kind of like Will Smith, laughing and joking. So he means not himself, but celebrity Will Smith. And I think what's interesting here is why he associates with them. Partly it's because of the basketball, because that's one of his sports that he enjoys, and so I think he learns through watching them on YouTube and through seeing how they play. But he also says, I respect sports celebrities a lot more than anyone else, because if you look at people like LeBron and Kobe and Michael Jordan, they're getting their money because they've got to the top, and it's like what they've earned. So again, we can see how associating with these celebrities and with the image that they represent, he can produce himself as someone who values earning, which, as we saw, is about his family tradition and his sense of deserving and being responsible, deserving the money he gets and being responsible as a young man. He also talks about their charity work and talks about how it's good that they give to the NBA charities, but also, like LeBron, he gave loads of money to this one kid to have an operation or something, which saved his life. And it's like what I think people should do. If you've got that money, you should save a life. So again, we see this kind of sense of giving to charity as a way of showing responsible use of money, showing that you deserve the status, the celebrity that you have, and that's again feeding his own sense of self. So I think what this shows is, I guess, this is only one small section of one of the 51 interviews that we have, but hopefully it shows you the richness of data and the kind of potential it has to illuminate young people's choices. And tune in later for more on that.